Welcome back everyone. In this lesson, we are going to begin creating our enemy. Now the enemy is essentially going to be a node or a scene that is going to move from one point to another and then back and forth. Okay, so essentially they're going to be going from one position, maybe up here at the top, to down below the platform. And the player's job is going to be avoiding them. Now if the player hits an enemy, then they are going to take damage. So let's begin by creating our enemy's root node. This is going to be of type Area 2D. Now an Area 2D node basically has a collider and it can detect a collision, although it is not a physical collision, but rather it is an area, meaning it is a collider that other colliders can pass through and detect. So the reason why we're doing this is because we don't want our player to bump into the enemy. We want them to be able to go through the enemy, but still have that be detected and then deal damage. So with the Area 2D node, let's rename this to be enemy. Let's also then get our enemy sprite. So we'll go into objects, we'll go into characters go down to where we have our bat, drag that in, and then make that a child of the enemy node, rename that to be sprite, and set its position to be 0 and 0 here. Now, let's select the enemy node. We can then move it over a little bit. And what we're going to do then is create ourselves a collider. So I'm going to right click on enemy, add child node. Here we are going to add a collision shape 2D. This is just going to be of type circle, and we'll make it a bit smaller so the player has a bit of leeway in dodging them. Okay, and finally one more node, and that is going to be the animation, not animation tree, the animation player. Okay, because we are going to have an animation for this enemy. Now, that is pretty much all we need to do in terms of node creation. Let's now go ahead and create ourselves a script. So we're going to create a new script on the Area 2D, and this one is of course going to be called enemy. So create that, and inside of the enemy script, we first of all want to define our variables. So what we're going to do is we are going to create 4 variables. The first 2 are going to be exported, so we'll go at export var move direction, which is going to be of type vector2. This here is basically going to be the direction and distance at which we are going to move from our original position. Okay, so at the start of the game, the enemy is going to keep note of their original position, and if for example we set the move direction to be 0 on the X and -20 on the Y, that means the enemy is going to move from its original position up -20 along the Y axis, stop, then go back to its original position, and then keep going back and forth between those 2 points. Okay, so back inside of our script, we can then create the second variable, which is going to manage the move speed. So how fast are we going to be moving to that point? And by default, we'll just make that 20. Then we want 2 variables, which are going to be set when the game has started. The first one is going to be called our start pos, start position, of type vector2. And this is going to be equal to global position. So this is just going to be the starting position of the enemy. Then we want another onReady variable called target pos. Now this position is going to be at the current time, where is this enemy moving towards? So this is going to change. At the start of the game, we want to move along that move direction. So here we are going to go global position plus move direction. Okay, now the next step is going to actually be moving this enemy over time. So we are going to do this by creating the physics process function, which gets called every physics tick. And the reason why we're doing this is just because the Area 2D that we are using has a collider, and since the player is going to be colliding with them, it's just better practice to have that all in the same loop. So inside a physics process, we essentially over time want to move our enemy towards whatever its target position is. So to do this, we are going to go global position equals its current global position dot move toward. Now we need to give it a target and then a delta. So the 2 is going to be our target position, and the delta, which is basically how far we are going to move this frame, is going to be our move speed times delta, okay? If we didn't add this times delta, then that essentially means we'll be moving at 20 pixels per frame, whereas with the delta, we're moving at 20 pixels per second, which is what we want, okay? Then, actually, let's just check to see if this works. So we'll go to our 2D mode here, select our enemy, we'll move them down here, and then we'll set their move direction to be 0 on the X, and let's just say we'll go 50 on the Y. So we should see this enemy moving 50 pixels up and then stopping. So let's press play, and oh, they're moving down actually, so we need to set the Y to be -50, okay? We'll press play again, and now you can see they're moving up 50 pixels, and then they stop. Now what we need to do is detect when they have reached their target position. We then need to change the target position so they begin moving down, then they reach that target, they move back up, that target, down, up, down, up, down, okay? So to do this, we are going to add in an if statement. So we're going to go if our global position currently equals the target position, then that means we have reached our target. Then we need to check to see what our target position is. Is our target position this global position plus move direction, or is our target position our start position? So we'll then go if target pos equals start pos, then we want to set our target position to be equal to our start pos plus move direction, else we want to set our target position to be equal to our start position, okay? It's quite convoluted and a bit complex, I guess, when I'm saying all these target position, start position words, but essentially we are ping-ponging between those 2 points. So now if I press play, you should see that when we reach the top, we are straight away going to go back down to the bottom and continue along this loop, which is great. Okay, so that is pretty much all of the movement set up. The next step is going to be detecting the player, essentially, okay? And we'll be working on that in the next lesson. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all then. Welcome back, everyone. In this lesson, we are going to implement the ability for the enemy here to actually detect the player, okay? It's going to detect when the player, if we get the player here, it's going to basically be able to detect when our player's collider overlaps or enters the enemy's collider. And when that happens, we want certain things to happen. In this case, taking damage on the player. So to do this, we're going to select our enemy node, the area 2D, go over to the node panel, and go over to signals here. Now in signals, we have a bunch that we can listen to. The one we want to look at is body entered, because since our player is of type character body 2D, that means that body entered is going to be triggered whenever it enters the collider of our enemy. So we're going to double click on that. We're going to select our enemy node, click connect. Now inside of our enemy script, we should have this on body entered function here. And body is essentially going to be the node that has entered our collider. Now, what we don't want to do is automatically deal damage to the body parameter node here, because what if, for example, it was another object in our scene that hit the enemy? We need to be certain that what we are hitting, or that what is entering us, is the player, because if it's not, then, well, we're going to have some errors. So the way we are going to know if this is the player is going to be with a group. So if I select our player and open up, or if we actually just open up our player scene and select the player's root node, we are going to assign them to a group called player. Now a group is essentially just a tag we can set, and then we can check those tags, in our case when we are colliding with them. So if we go over to the node panel, next to the signals button at the top is one called groups. Now if we select that, we can click on the plus and we can create a new group. Now this one is going to be called player. Click OK, and now you can see that our player node is assigned to the player group. So what we can then do is, if we go back to our level, open up our enemy script, we can check to see if this node is a part of the player group, and if so, that means we have found our player. So what we're going to do is we're going to go if not body dot is in group, of group player, make sure that you're spelling it the exact same way, then we are going to return. So essentially, if this body is not in the group player, return. Basically end the function right here so that whatever we write next does not run. Otherwise, if it is going to run, then we want to basically do something. In this case, it's going to be dealing damage to the player, but for now, let's just print something out to the output. So here we'll go deal damage to player. Okay, save that, and let's test it out. So I'm going to press play, and keep an eye on the output here on the left-hand side. Okay, if I jump through the enemy, you can see that it says deal damage to player every time I go through them, which is exactly what we want. So the next step is going to be animating our enemy, because right now our enemy is pretty static. So we're going to add a little bit of an animation to them. Basically, it's going to be the bat with its flapping wings. So if we go over to our enemy node right here, we are going to turn it into a scene very shortly. Don't worry about that. Let's go back to the inspector. Let's select the animation player node right here. And then what we want to do is we want to go to animation, new, and here we're just going to call this one, we'll just call this one fly. Okay. The track is going to be its sprite. We can click on the key next to the texture property, click create. And then what we're going to do is basically, you see here, we have these 3 different sprites inside of our file system for the bat. So we're going to basically reduce our time from 1 second, probably down to about 0.5. Okay, we can zoom out to find that. There we go. We can then move the player head forward a little bit, right click, insert key. Then this is going to be set to the next value, which is going to be the one with its wings down like this. You can see if I pan through them, that's what it's going to look like. And then finally at the end here, we can create another key. And this one is going to be for when its wings are fully down, like that. So if I play this animation, it's probably not in the way that we want it. Oh, let's click loop, click play. As you can see, this is what it looks like. We probably need to change things around so it's less buggy like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bring our duration down to 0.3 seconds and then make these every 0.2 seconds. So you can see at 0 seconds, we have the wings up. At 0.1 seconds, we have the wings horizontal. And at 0.2 seconds, we have the wings down. And then once it reaches 0.3, it is going to reset and loop. So if I press play, that is what our animation looks like. I still think it's a bit fast. So in fact, let's actually go ahead and stretch this out a little bit. So I'm just going to move these over like this. Okay, we can make the animation a bit longer. Let's make it perhaps 0.45 or 0.4 and play that. There we go, something like this. Now, if we go ahead, save this and press play, you should see that the animation is not playing. So why is that happening? Well, by default, the animation is not going to play. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to our script on our enemy, and we are going to create the ready function. So func ready. And in here, we essentially just want to play the fly animation from our animation player. Now, we don't really have to create a variable for this since we are only accessing the animation player once, although if you do want to have different animations for your enemy that get played at different times, then I recommend creating a variable for it. Instead, I'm just going to click and drag the animation player in, so we get a reference to it. Then we can go dot, play, and then we can go fly, just like that. Now, if I press play, we're going to play that fly animation, and it's going to go like so. We can then run through the enemy and take damage. But we aren't taking damage just yet. We are only printing that out to the output. So in the next lesson, we are going to implement the ability for our player to have health, take damage, and when they reach 0 health, the level is going to reset. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you all then. Welcome back everyone. In this lesson, we are going to add the ability for our player to take damage, and then once they reach 0 health, the scene is going to reset. So what we're going to do is start off by going to our player script, and at the top we need to create a new variable. Now this variable is going to be called health. So we're going to go export var health. This is going to be of type int, and it's going to be equal to 3 by default. So essentially, the player is going to be able to take 3 hits before they are defeated. Next, what we want to do is we want to go down and create the take damage function. Now, take damage is going to be called when, of course, the player takes damage. So that's going to be when they are hit by the enemy. So here we'll create the function take damage, and it's going to send over an amount, which is of type int. So this is essentially going to be the amount of damage. Now, the reason for this is because we might have some enemies that might deal 2 damage instead of just 1 later on. Inside this function, we are essentially just going to go health minus equals amount, and then we want to check to see if our health is less than or equals to 0. So here we'll go if health is less than or equals to 0, then we want to call the game over function, which we can then create down here. So func game over, just like that. And inside of game over, we essentially just want to reload our current scene. Later on, we might make it so it goes back to the menu, but for now, let's just reload the current scene. So here we'll go get tree, which is going to get our scene tree, and then we want to change that to a specific scene file. So change scene to file, and then we'll select level 1. There we go. So now if we press play and try it out, well, of course nothing's going to happen. We need to actually deal damage and call this take damage function. So over inside of the enemy script, this is where we can then go down to our onBodyEntered function, which gets called when a body has entered the collider of the enemy. We are then checking to see if it is not the player, then return. Otherwise, we are printing this to the output. Now instead of this, we're instead going to go body.takeDamage, and we'll make that just 1 damage for now. Now, we can go ahead and press play, and to test this out, to actually see what our health currently is without having the UI active, I am going to go into 2D mode here. Now, 2D mode here basically means we can then click on things, and as you can see, they get selected, and we can then see them inside the inspector, which is great. Now, if I select our player, you'll see that it is actually selecting our collision shape and not the actual root node. So to fix this, what we're going to do is go up to where we have our show list of selectable nodes at position clicked, and select that, then select our player, and select the player node. So now we can see our health over here, and if I go back to input mode, meaning we can now input stuff, when I collide with the enemy, you can see it goes down to 2, then 1, and then finally on this final hit, it's going to go to 0 and reset the scene. Okay, there we go. So we can now see how we have this resetting of the scene when we reach 0 health, which is very nice. Now you may notice that you could potentially be getting this error here, which says removing a collision node during a physics callback is not allowed and will cause undesired behavior. Now the reason why this is happening is because when we are taking damage, we are then calling the game over function, okay? And remember, this take damage function is called by the onBodyEntered. So essentially what is happening here is when we are loading the level 1 scene, we have to first of all unload everything. So we are basically deleting all of the nodes and then loading in the level again. Now, just with the way Godot is set up, we cannot destroy a collision object during a physics callback, okay? And the onBodyEntered, since this runs in the physics loop, this gets called on a physics frame. So essentially what we need to do is wait until the end of the frame before calling game over. And to do that, we are going to use the callDeferred function. So here inside of take damage, I am going to delete where we are calling game over and instead write down call deferred, okay? And in here we can then enter in the function as a string, so we'll go game over, like so. Now essentially what call deferred does is it's going to wait until the frame has ended and then call game over. So that should hopefully help with the error. Let's save that and press play to see if it works. So we'll go ahead and get the game over, and there you go, and you can see down in the output there are no errors, which is great. So that is now working. It is something that doesn't affect the gameplay per se because we are essentially reloading the level at that point. If you were trying to destroy a collision node and you were still running in the same scene, then there might be some issues. But overall, it's just better to fix the errors when you can, because otherwise it's going to fill up the output, it's going to clog it, it's going to hide any other potential errors you might want to look at, and it's overall, like I said, the best practice to work on fixing the errors. And in this case, we learned something new. We learned about the callDeferred function, which you can of course learn more about if you hover over it. You can see more in depth about what it does and how it works. Now one more thing, let's actually go ahead and save our enemy scene, or our enemy as a scene. So what I'm going to do is open up our scenes folder, drag in the enemy into that folder, and save it as enemy.tscn. Now we can go ahead and duplicate our enemies around the level. So let's move one here perhaps, maybe another one here, maybe another one here. We can even perhaps change this one's. Maybe it can go from -80 and maybe it can move a bit faster, so we can change its move speed. And you can basically see how we can add in these different enemies. You can see this one on the right hand side is moving a bit faster and a bit longer. So yeah, that is a setup of take damage and it working with our enemies.